Hey guys, it's a late start to 2024, but with Christmas and kids, you know the story. But before we started releasing some videos on 2024 whiskies, I wanted to do a recap of 2023. Now I've been keeping meticulous record of every whiskey I've tried in the past year and how I rated it, because I'm OCD ADHD AF. So this is my top 5 whiskies from 2023. Hey guys, I'm Nath Martyn, the Whisky Scribe. I'm a whiskey enthusiast and I love all things whiskey. But taste is subjective and there's a lot of different whiskies out there. So whether you consider yourself a connoisseur or you're just looking to understand more about whiskey, let's explore it all together. If you're new to the channel, I put up new videos on whiskey every week, so hit the subscribe button. You can also follow me over on Instagram. Now, I was really fortunate to be able to try a wide selection of whiskies in 2023, from whiskey tastings with the Queensland Malt Whisky Society to whiskey expos, visits to the distilleries and the bottles I picked up myself. My Google Sheets has whiskies from all corners of the globe, if there are corners in the globe, just the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now with my highest scored whiskies, for this I'm only including whiskies that were commercially available at some point. So I haven't included whiskies that I was able to pull directly from the barrel when visiting distilleries, or some of the pre-release samples that I've tried. A lot of these rated really, really highly, but some of them are a bit hush-hush until their release date, and I need to keep some content for 2024. I will also touch on some of the worst whiskies I tried in 2023, you know, for the drama. But before we go on, if you haven't already yet, hit the like button. It really does help me out. It's just down there, it's pretty... Go on, I'll wait. Now, coming in at number 5 was the Demons Rising 001. This was a whiskey that was a collaboration of Highwayman and AOB, both Australian distillers, and the spirit was made on the same still at different times of ownership and in different locations. It has a great story about the journey and how that ties in with the name, so you can check out the review for that here. But what I love about this whiskey, it is big and bold. Although it's a non-age statement, it's spent time in 7 different casks. It's been aged in Tawny, Apera, Pinot Noir, Bourbon, Botrytis, Mead and rum casks and bottled at 57.8%. Now this sort of combination could easily be too busy on the palate or have too much of an alcohol burn, but it is actually really well balanced. And although the whiskey itself packs a punch, you can unpack it and actually discover flavor notes that come from each of the different barrels. Now unfortunately this one is sold out, but it initially retailed at $249, which is a fantastic price for an Australian whiskey of that caliber. Now number 4 was another Australian whiskey, and I promise it's the last of the Australian whiskies in this lineup, but it was the Nant single cask that I opened for my 40th birthday. In fact, I'm enjoying it right now. This was a bottle that was gifted to me and I held on to it for a number of years to save for a special occasion because the distillery had closed down under really controversial circumstances. If you want to know more about that story, I recommend watching this video. And those controversial circumstances make the fact that this is such a good whiskey so much more disappointing. It was a non-age statement single malt from Tasmania that was aged in French oak Pinot Noir casks and bottled at 63%. And it's big and bold and it's almost like honeyed wine. There's all sorts of flavor notes in there that work really, really well with each other. Again, very much like the Demons Rising. It's big, it's bold, but at the same time it's complex and it's well balanced. So again, you can sit down and unpack it for such a long time, and that's how it sort of ends up in this list. The fact that it's not one-dimensional, there's so much more to it, and it's a little bit different every time you come back. Now, it initially sold for $175 per 500ml bottle, but if you find any of the original Nant releases now on auction sites, they go for hundreds, often thousands of dollars. This is all I have left, so I'm just gonna have to really savor it. Now, whiskey number 3 was also for my 40th birthday. It was generously gifted to me by a channel subscriber. It was the Vintage Select Craig Duff 1973 40-year-old whiskey. Now, I often say that when it comes to really high age statements, you should go with independent bottlers, and this whiskey like really held up to that. It was the oldest whiskey I've ever tried, and it was amazing. Now, I'm not going to say too much about that one because we actually only recently filmed a review of it and I'll be posting that next week, so keep an eye out for that. But the short story is, it's an independent bottling from a closed distillery that has since reopened. It is double peated, whatever that means. And although it's sold out, the last retail price I was able to find was $3,000. Now number 2 was the Scotch Malt Whisky Society 5.98 A Passionate Pavlova. I love the weird names they give their whiskies because a Passionate Pavlova is a great description of it. It's an 18-year-old bourbon cask from Auchentoshan Distillery, bottled at 58.2%. Now, I'm a big fan of Auchentoshan Distillery because I've actually been there in person, but this one was really unique. It was incredibly fragrant with all kinds of fruit flavors on the palate, hence the name Pavlova. Those fruit flavors you get initially, if you add a few drops of water, they flip into a whole new array of flavors. So it goes from pineapple, apricot, and blackberry, and you add some water and you get mangoes, passion fruit, even chocolate and cream. Now there were only 203 bottles of this ever released, and Australia's allocation was only 36 bottles. I was very fortunate to try this because I attended a tasting earlier this year held by Brisbane Whisky Scene. So if you are based in Brisbane, follow Mark from Brisbane Whisky Scene, great source of whisky and tastings and pretty much any whisky related event in Brisbane. But if you are a Scotch Malt Whisky Society member, this one is actually still available on their website for $240. Fantastic price for a dram of this quality. Now before I get to my favourite whisky of 2023, I want to touch on some of the worst whiskies I had in the past year. I don't want to trash a bunch of whiskies to make myself sound more knowledgeable. I just want to add some context to show that sometimes trying a bad whiskey is still an interesting and worthwhile experience. I previously did a whiskey review of the Glenmorangie peated single malt, and I was really disappointed with how that peat carried across. In fact, if you watch that video, you can even see the moment I become crestfallen. And that's because I considered, and still do consider, the Glenmorangie Classic range to be fantastic budget single malt whiskey. If you don't have a lot to spend, you're still not going to be disappointed, and it's something you can happily drink neat. The context I'm adding here is that my disappointment was my disappointment. There were some people in the comments who agreed with my take, but there were also people who said that they considered it a great budget peated whiskey that is one of their favorites that they'll always go back to. And that's fine, all of our tastes are different. But another interesting thing that came up in the comments was the peated malt that they use for the Glenmorangie peated actually comes from the same place that provides the peated malt for the Octomore series. And Octomore whiskies are fantastic. In fact, last year's release missed out on being in my top 5 by a fraction of a point. So why would the peated whiskey from Glenmorangie be nowhere near as good? It's possible that it comes from the chill filtering. It may have actually taken some of the natural oils out that help to balance out that peat and carry the flavor. But knowing that allows you to know a little bit more about what you're after when it comes to whiskey. The other low scoring whiskey that I'm glad I tried was the Black Douglas Pure Malt 8-year-old. This isn't the Black Douglas that you can pick up in the stores today. This was a release from the 1980s that was actually bottled in Australia. Now, the label called itself Scotch and listed the ABV as 37.5%, which is the minimum ABV to be classed as whiskey here in Australia. But according to the Scotch Whisky Association, whiskey needs to be 40% ABV or higher, and it needs to actually be bottled in Scotland in order to be called Scotch. I was only able to try this one because I was attending a Queensland Malt Whisky Society tasting when one of the older members brought something in from his collection that he'd held onto for a few decades. He even said there was speculation at the time that their blended malt actually included a bit of Australian whiskey mixed in. Now, although I didn't especially rate this whiskey, it was a time capsule of what was available in Australia in the 80s, and it was a fantastic experience to be able to try that piece of history. And then last, but certainly not least, my favorite whiskey from 2023 was an independent bottling from La Maison du Whiskies Artist Series, the Edor 10-year-old 2009 Cask 79 Artist Number 9. So this was a Highland single malt that spent 10 years in sherry butts and was bottled at 62%. If you're laughing at sherry butts, it's a dimension, it's a unit of measure for a sherry barrel. It's probably also where we get the original phrase, a buttload of something. So it was bottled at 62%, and the artwork was provided by Wang Yabin in order to make the bottle collectible. What I absolutely loved about this whiskey is it evolved in the glass. So when you nose it, you're getting some of those classic sherry notes, and then you taste it and it's a different array of flavors. But when you come back to it, those flavors are different again. And then you taste it and those flavors are different as well. And each time you come back to this whiskey, it has changed. And every single version of it is a fantastic whiskey, but it was different every time. It was an evolution in the glass. I don't even think there's anything that distillers and blenders can do to make a whiskey do that. I think it's An absolute fluke of whiskey making, which is why it made so much sense for the independent bottlers to just release it as a single cask. And that's why there were only 648 bottles ever released, and they've completely sold out. Now, I was fortunate enough to be able to try this one by attending another Queensland Malt Whisky Society tasting, and this whiskey wasn't even available in Australia. They had to order it from overseas, and they paid close to $400 for it. Keep in mind that while this whiskey cost just under $400 and was my absolute favourite of last year, when I tried that, it was the same night that I also tried a 30-year-old whiskey that they picked up for $3,000. That one was nice, but it didn't even make my top 5. So that's my top 5 whiskies of 2023. If you're looking for takeaways from this list, I'd say that high age statements are great, but not always. Or expensive whiskies can be fantastic, but so can more affordable ones. Poorly reviewed whiskies can still be really interesting and worth trying. I think the biggest takeaway should just be to try a wider range of whiskey. Join a whiskey tasting club. Go out there and explore whiskies that are not the sort of thing that you might normally pick up a whole bottle of in the bottle shop, because you never know when you're going to discover your next favourite whiskey. On that though, what do you want to see more from me of this year? Now, I know I've done quite a few niche whiskies in the past 12 months and a few Australian drams, but do you want to see more whiskies that are more widely available? It's been a little while since I've done an education piece. Do you want to see more of that? Or any topics that you would like me to explore? And lastly, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who has subscribed and watched these videos over the past year. It was an incredibly daunting experience creating that first YouTube video. I still cringe when I look back on it. I'd like to think we've come a long way. It was a steep learning curve creating videos for YouTube, and it's just gotten a little bit more challenging as we've now had a new baby join us, but we're looking forward to continuing to put out these videos, explore new whiskies, and keep meeting great people in the whiskey industry and sharing that with people who love whiskey, which is you. So if you've been with us for the past year, thank you so much. If you're new to the channel, please do stick around. We've got a lot more to come, and we can only move up from here. We're excited for the whiskies we're going to try in 2024, but for now, enjoy what's in your glass and slange.